Thanks for joining us for another episode of Battle for the Belt. Today I'm at the Western Agricultural Research Station with a new faculty member, Dr. Eugene Law. Eugene, you want to tell us what you do here at Ohio State?
Yeah, so I recently joined the Department of Horticulture and Crop Science as the assistant professor of weed ecology. So my research teaching extension program is focused on weed management and from the ecology perspective, so biology of the plant, understanding its interaction with the crop and the soil and the other environmental factors, as well as a little bit of an emphasis on non-chemical weed management. So that's things like thinking about crop rotation, cover cropping, biological control, mechanical control, all of those things that you might integrate with your chemical program to get a better handle on the weeds.
So we're really happy to have you here at Ohio State and in the department. So this is not technically Battle for the Belt study, but we had the same planting date. So these soybeans were planted on March 25th, and it went through wet spells, cold spells. Most recently, about 4 days ago, the temperature got down to about 28 degrees here. So Eugene, can you tell me what weed we're seeing here in this study?
Yeah, so here is a little tiny seedling of giant ragweed, which is a particularly problematic weed here in the state of Ohio. It is an early emerging weed, as you can see. It's coming up at a little bit actually more advanced than the soybeans that were planted a few weeks ago. And you're seeing it's past cotyledon stage. It's getting its first true leaves out. It is resistant to several herbicides, including ALS inhibitors, which are some of our better pre-plant or residual options. So there was a residual applied to this plot, but the ragweed are coming through that, maybe a tiny bit dinged up, and but they're doing all right. So the issue here is that if ragweed is emerging this early and it's coming up at the same time as these ultra early planted soybeans, and the soybeans are getting a little bit of frost damage from that cold spell a couple of days back, the ragweed's not showing that frost damage. So we can assume based on its early emergence timing that this is a plant that is well adapted to colder temperatures, possibly wetter conditions. And in general, weeds will exhibit those sorts of characteristics relative to crops. Right. And that's why they're weeds. Yep. It's because they're really well adapted to these sorts of conditions. They can get up early. They can get a little bit of a head start ahead of your crop if they're not managed at the right time. And so I would expect, particularly with some of the damage to the soybean and the fact it might be growing a little bit slower with the cold nights we've been having, that these ragweeds will get above the soybean pretty early.
So is there anything we can do? So there's this weed crop competition where I think the ragweed will probably win.
Right.
What can we do from a cultural practices or management standpoint to make your soybeans more competitive?
Right. Well, so one of the things that this study is intended to look at is that planting date factor. And so one of the things that happened here is because the burn down was so early, typically that would clean up any of the seedling ragweeds that you might find out here. And so that might be a little bit of a downside of the early planting. The other early planting downside we're going to see here is that due to some of the frost damage, we might have a lower stand count in this plot. And over the long term in the season, soybeans might be able to sort of bounce back from that and do more branching, produce more pods. And so a slightly lower stand count might not hurt your yields in the end, but what it does hurt is the speed at which your soybean stand will close the canopy. And so that's a big factor in the weed crop competition race. If the crop can get above the weeds and shade them out, then you're going to have fewer weed problems season long. But if, like in this case, the weed gets a head start, then it may be shading your crop and you've got the opposite effect. And that can be one of the bigger negative impacts on your yield. So culturally, you might be able to sort of increase the speed of that canopy closure through things like using narrower rows or increasing your seeding rate. You often find that organic growers will increase their seeding rates relative to conventional growers for that exact reason. They have fewer weed management options, so they want to get the crop up and over the weeds as fast as possible. You can use things like cover crops. So cover crops here there's a decent amount of corn residue on here, but if it had an actual living cover crop that was terminated prior to planting, that provides a mulch layer that can slow down or prevent germination of weeds. And even if you delay that emergence of the weed a little bit, it can make a big difference in allowing your crop to get that head start.
Perfect. Well, I appreciate you joining today for Battle for the Belt, and I look forward to seeing your research program progress. And we're going to be tracking canopy closure on the soybeans and looking at the weed canopy as well. So we'll have more data later this summer.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yep.